This is the Late Round Podcast with your host, JJ Zacharisa.
What's up, everyone? It's JJ Zacharisa, the editor-in-chief at FanDuel and at numberfire.com, and this is episode 424 of the Late Round Podcast, one of the many shows that are part of the FanDuel Podcast Network. Thanks for tuning in. The 2020 NFL season is in full swing, as you guys know, and there's no easier way to get in on the action than with FanDuel's Gridiron Pick'em contest. All you have to do is pick the winner of each week's matchups correctly, and you'll take home a share of the $5,000 weekly jackpot. And the best part? It's completely free to play. You should definitely check it out. Who doesn't love free things? To enter, visit playfree.fanduel.com/gridiron. Eligibility restrictions apply. Trend 1 this week is a continuation from one last week, and it's that the Seahawks have now allowed 500 more yards to wide receivers than any other team in football. 82.3% of the receiving yards that they've allowed have gone to wide receivers. The next closest team, San Francisco, is at 75.7%. Keep starting your wide receivers against the Seattle team. The Minnesota Vikings have had a grand total of 8 tight end receptions this year. Not only have they thrown the fewest pass attempts in the NFL to start the season, but their tight end target share as a team is just 14.7%. The league average is closer to 21%. Now I know, guys, I was into Irv Smith as a late round dart throw tight end this year. That's definitely not going to happen. He's not going to be a breakout tight end. Now speaking of the Vikings, Kirk Cousins has a higher deep ball rate than any other quarterback in football right now. So even though they're not throwing a lot, at least the 2 pass catchers that matter on that team, Justin Jefferson and Adam Thielen, they're at least seeing targets down the field. Thielen actually ranks second in the NFL in 15-plus air yard targets, and Justin Jefferson is tied for 14th. Trend 4 is still loosely related to the Vikings, but it's that the Dallas Cowboys have thrown the ball 203 times this year, the most in football. Through 4 weeks, they've thrown it more than twice as much as the Minnesota Vikings, who've thrown it 100 times, and they've also thrown it more than twice as much as the Ravens, who are at 101. Dak Prescott is now pacing for over 800 pass attempts when Matthew Stafford's league record is 727 pass attempts. Now, I mentioned this on the 15 Transaction Show when talking about Hollywood Brown, but this is where we need context with target shares. I talk about target share on this podcast because the majority of teams meet in the middle in terms of passing volume. We're not always looking at the extremes. What target share allows us to do is see how a team values an individual player by giving him the ball, and it helps us project future performance when things aren't thrown off by game script. But in the case of the extremes, you need high target shares for wide receivers and pass catchers on run-heavy teams. You don't need that if you're a wide receiver on Dallas, and this trend shows that. 2 teams have targeted their wide receivers on fewer than 40% of their targeted attempts, the Raiders and the 49ers. We've actually only seen that happen once since 2011, and it was the 2013 New Orleans Saints. I'd expect we see more volume go to wideouts for both Vegas and San Francisco moving forward when their wide receivers get healthy. We're seeing that with Deebo Samuel, and then obviously in Vegas, we'll eventually see their rookie wide receivers get back on the field, hopefully. Brandin Cooks gave you a goose egg in week 4. But he still ran 5 more routes than any other Houston Texans wide receiver. And on the year, he still has a target share north of 17%. So I don't think it's time to drop Brandin Cooks, especially with the coaching change. But you can't start him until the production matches these peripherals. Trend 7 is kind of a sad one. The last time T.Y. Hilton ranked higher than 10th in weekly wide receiver scoring was week 1 of the 2019 season. Over his last 9 games, because 10 games ago he did rank 10th in weekly scoring, but over his last 9 games, he's finished as the wide receiver 58, 64, 58, 61, 38, 50, 87, 56, and 76. Guys, that is atrocious. I don't think that you need to drop Hilton, but you cannot start T.Y. Hilton moving forward. Similar to Brandin Cooks, you need the production to start hitting before you can have any confidence throwing him in your lineup. Over the first 2 weeks of the season, Marvin Jones had target shares of 19.5% and 20%. And then Kenny Golladay returned. And over the last 2 weeks, those shares have fallen to 9.7% and 6.9%. This is definitely a concern. I put this back to back with the Cooks and Hilton trends this week because he's sort of in a similar boat, where you want to drop him, but you might not really want to. I'd actually be more inclined to drop Jones than Brandin Cooks right now, just given their peripheral numbers, given their environment. I don't think we see this continue for Jones to this degree, but it's definitely not a good sign. After seeing just 5.7% of the Browns' targets in Week 1, Austin Hooper has seen 19.1%, 18.2%, and 26.9% of the team's targets from Weeks 2 through 4. He now has a top 10 target share at the tight end position. Now, I won't lie, guys, I almost thought that Hooper would be a drop candidate after Week 1, but he's really turned things around. Cleveland now is targeting their tight ends at the 5th highest rate in the league, which is something that we figured would happen in this Stefanski offense. It is pretty interesting to see what's going on in Cleveland versus Minnesota, since Kevin Stefanski isn't with the Vikings anymore. And that's especially true at the tight end position and what I talked about earlier, with the Vikings not utilizing their tight ends. The final trend this week is that Josh Allen currently ranks outside the top 10 in rushing yards at the quarterback position. He was 3rd in quarterback rushing yards last year. Allen sort of reminds me of how people viewed Lamar Jackson earlier in the 2019 season, where Jackson showed clear improvement as a passer, but so many people were like, but you drafted him for his rushing. That's not true. We draft players because we know they can give us that rushing floor. But if they combine that with a good passing ceiling, then you have an awesome fantasy asset. Now, Allen isn't on Jackson's levels from last year, but this trend shows us that Allen is going to be a strong fantasy asset moving forward because he doesn't actually need his rushing anymore to be a super strong fantasy quarterback. Of course, he's been able to find the end zone on the ground, and that hasn't hurt. But the main point here with Josh Allen and any other quarterback with rushing upside is that he now has even more ways to hit each and every week. That raises both his floor and his ceiling. That's going to do it for today's show. Thanks to all of you for listening. If you've yet subscribed to the Late Round Podcast, make sure you are by searching for it pretty much anywhere podcasts can be found. And don't forget to follow me on Twitter @LateRoundQB. Thanks for listening, everyone. I'll be back tomorrow with the weekly matchup show.